The first thing everyone notices is the silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that presses down on your chest, heavy and ceremonial. The kind that only exists in rooms where money makes the rules. Crystal chandeliers glow above a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. At the altar stands a man worth hundreds of millions, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. He adjusts his cufflinks, glances at his watch, and exhales through his nose, already impatient. This wedding is not about love. It never was. It is about deadlines, signatures, and a contract that will keep his empire intact. Then the music begins, and the bride steps into view. He lifts his eyes for the first time, and a single thought cuts through his mind, sharp and final. This is the woman I am supposed to marry? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The groom's name is Alexander Reed, a self-made millionaire who learned early that feelings are liabilities and appearances are leverage. At 36, he has everything the world respects: power, influence, and a last name that opens doors before he even knocks. What he does not have is time. His late grandfather's will is explicit, cold, and perfectly timed. Remain unmarried, in control of the holding company transfers to the board within 90 days. Alexander refuses to lose what he built, so he does what he always does when cornered. He calculates. The woman walking toward him now is part of that calculation. Her name is Eleanor Shaw. She is quiet, plainly dressed beneath the custom veil, her gown modest where others would choose spectacle. No dramatic makeup, no practiced smile, just steady steps and eyes fixed forward. Alexander barely notices the way her hands are clasped, not in fear, but in restraint. He notices only what he believes matters. She is not beautiful by his world standards. She does not belong in the glossy magazines stacked in his penthouse. And that, to him, makes her perfect. For the deal, 3 months. Public appearances. No emotions. A signature marriage that solves his problem and disappears without consequences. As Eleanor reaches the altar, Alexander leans in just enough for her to hear him, his voice low, controlled, almost bored. This is just a contract, he says. You will be compensated as agreed. No complications. Eleanor meets his eyes for the first time. She does not flinch. She does not argue. She gives a single, almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, Alexander feels a flicker of relief. Obedience. Predictability. Exactly what he paid for. What he does not see is the quiet line Eleanor has already drawn inside herself, the boundary between survival and surrender. The officiant begins to speak, words about love and commitment echoing hollowly in the vast room. Guests smile, cameras flash, and a dozen business rivals watch closely, measuring the groom's expression for weakness. Alexander slips the ring onto Eleanor's finger without hesitation, without warmth. When it is her turn, her hand is steady. The ring is cool, heavy, symbolic of a life she never wanted but chose anyway. When the officiant declares them married, polite applause fills the hall. Alexander turns, ready to lead his new wife down the aisle like an acquisition successfully closed. As they walk, he whispers, almost as an afterthought, "Remember your role. Stay quiet. Let me handle everything." Eleanor answers softly, with a calm that does not match her circumstances. "I always do." And as the doors close behind them, sealing the marriage, the contract, and the illusion, no one in that room realizes the truth. Alexander Reed did not marry an ugly woman. He married someone who sees exactly who he is, and who has already decided how much of him she is willing to endure. The reception unfolds like a carefully staged photograph, flawless on the surface and empty underneath. Crystal glasses clink, a string quartet hums softly, and Alexander Reed moves through the room with Eleanor on his arm, as if she were another asset temporarily assigned to him. He smiles when required, nods to board members, accepts congratulations that sound more like confirmations of a successful merger than blessings for a marriage. Eleanor walks half a step behind him, exactly where he positioned her, her posture straight, her expression composed, absorbing the glances, the silent assessments, The unspoken question of how someone like her ended up beside someone like him. To Alexander, the evening is already over. The real business begins the moment the doors close and the cameras disappear. In the back of a black luxury sedan, the city lights sliding past tinted windows, he loosens his tie and finally speaks without ceremony. We should set expectations clearly, he says, his voice calm, precise, the same tone he uses in boardrooms when numbers do not lie. This marriage exists for one purpose. 90 days. After that, we go our separate ways. Eleanor turns her head slightly, listening, not interrupting. Alexander continues, outlining the arrangement as if reading terms from memory. You will live in the penthouse. You will attend events when required. You will not speak to the press unless instructed. There will be no personal questions, no emotional involvement, and no attempts to change the arrangement. In return, your compensation will be transferred monthly, as agreed, and a final settlement will be wired the day the contract ends. He pauses, then adds, almost generously, I am not cruel. I simply value efficiency. Eleanor nods once. That is acceptable, she replies quietly. Her voice is steady, neither grateful nor resentful. The simplicity of her response unsettles him for half a second, but Alexander dismisses it. Silence, to him, has always meant compliance. What he does not ask is why a woman like her agreed so quickly, why she did not negotiate, why she did not ask for more. He does not see the other side of the equation forming behind her calm exterior. Eleanor Shaw did not walk into this marriage blind. She knows exactly what 90 days represents. Not romance, not rescue, but survival. The money will keep the small house she grew up in from being sold to cover debts she did not create. It will keep her younger brother in treatment without choosing between medication and rent. It will buy time, and time is the one thing her family no longer has. She did not marry a millionaire because she wanted his world. She married him because she refused to let her family disappear quietly. The car pulls into the underground garage of the penthouse tower, smooth and silent. Inside the elevator, Alexander reviews the next steps without looking at her. Tomorrow, my legal team will go over the contract in detail. You are free to suggest amendments, though I do not expect many. Eleanor meets her reflection in the mirrored walls, seeing the woman the world has already labeled before knowing her name. I have read it, she says. Alexander finally turns, surprised. You have read it? Yes. Every clause. He studies her for a moment, recalibrating. You understand that this is not a real marriage, he says. I understand exactly what it is, Eleanor replies. A temporary role. When the elevator doors open to the penthouse, expansive and immaculate, Alexander gestures toward the space like a host concluding a tour. Make yourself comfortable. My schedule is demanding. We will not see much of each other outside public obligations. That works for me, Eleanor answers. As he disappears into his private office, already back in control, Eleanor stands alone in the vast living room. The silence returns, but this time it is different. Not oppressive, not cold. It is the silence of a decision made and a line drawn. She removes her ring slowly, places it on the marble counter, and exhales. 90 days, she thinks. 90 days to endure judgment, invisibility, and a man who believes he has measured her worth. What neither of them understands yet is that contracts can define time, but they cannot contain consequence. And this arrangement, so clean on paper, has already begun to shift in ways Alexander Reed does not see coming. The next morning arrives without warmth, filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook a city already in motion, and Eleanor wakes early, instinctively, as if she does not belong to the luxury surrounding her. The penthouse is quiet, immaculate, impersonal, more like a showroom than a home. At precisely 9 o'clock, Alexander Reed's legal team arrives, efficient and polished, carrying leather folders and neutral smiles. They sit around a long glass table while Eleanor takes the seat offered to her, folding her hands in her lap, listening as if this were a business meeting she has attended many times before. The lead attorney clears his throat and begins outlining the contract, not with hostility, but with practiced detachment. Clause by clause, the marriage is reduced to structure. Duration set at 90 days. Public appearances limited to pre-approved events. No interviews. No social media presence without clearance. Separate bedrooms. No claims on assets. No expectations beyond performance. Alexander watches Eleanor from across the table, waiting for hesitation, confusion, or resistance. Instead, she listens carefully, occasionally nodding, her gaze steady. When the attorney pauses and asks if she has questions, Alexander prepares himself to negotiate concessions he does not intend to grant. Eleanor speaks calmly. "I would like one clarification," she says. Alexander raises an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. The attorney gestures for her to continue. "I will fulfill every public obligation outlined here," Eleanor says, "but I will not tolerate humiliation." There is a brief silence. Alexander leans back slightly, amused. "Humiliation is subjective," he replies. Eleanor turns to him fully for the first time since the meeting began. "Disrespect is not," she says. "If I am to play this role, I expect to be treated as a partner in public, not an embarrassment to be hidden or managed." The attorneys exchange subtle glances. This was not in their briefing. Alexander studies her face, searching for leverage, for weakness, and finding neither. "Fine," he says after a moment. "Public courtesy is reasonable." The attorney makes a note. Eleanor continues, her voice still level. "I will not be corrected, interrupted, or spoken over in public settings. If I am present, I am present by your request." Alexander feels a flicker of irritation, quickly buried beneath control. He nods once. "Agreed." The contract is adjusted. Pens are passed across the table. Eleanor signs her name with unhurried precision. When Alexander signs, he does not look at her, already moving on in his mind. The meeting concludes, and the attorneys depart, leaving behind silence and the faint scent of cologne and paper. Alexander stands, straightening his jacket. "Our first public appearance is tonight," he says. "A charity gala. You will wear something appropriate. A stylist will arrive at noon." Eleanor inclines her head. "Understood." As he turns to leave, she adds, quietly, "I will not be transformed." Alexander stops. "What does that mean?" he asks. "I will wear what is suitable," Eleanor replies, "but I will not be redesigned to make others comfortable." Another pause. Alexander considers correcting her, asserting dominance, reminding her of the hierarchy he believes exists between them. Instead, he finds himself saying, "Do as you see fit." When he leaves the room, Eleanor remains at the table, the signed contract resting between her palms. She reads her name again, feeling its weight. This agreement has rules, but so does she. Later that afternoon, the stylist arrives with racks of dresses and a practiced smile. She gestures enthusiastically, suggesting silhouettes, colors, alterations. Eleanor listens politely, then selects a simple dress, elegant but restrained, refusing embellishment. When asked if she wants makeup enhanced, she declines. "Natural is fine," she says. That evening, as Alexander sees her step into the car beside him, he notices something unexpected. She is not stunning. She is not dramatic. But she is composed, unyielding, and entirely unashamed of who she is. For reasons he cannot explain, that unsettles him more than defiance ever could. As the city lights blur past once more, Alexander believes he has defined every rule of this marriage. What he does not yet understand is that Eleanor Shaw has defined her own, and she does not intend to break them. The weeks that follow fall into a rhythm that feels deliberate and rehearsed, as if Eleanor and Alexander are actors moving through scenes written by other people. Events blur together into a controlled montage of appearances and departures. Charity dinners, museum fundraisers, board-adjacent luncheons. At each one, Alexander arrives first, confident and polished, and Eleanor follows moments later, always composed, always understated, always half a step behind unless protocol requires otherwise. Whispers trail them through every room. Some glance at Eleanor with curiosity, others with barely disguised confusion, and a few with open judgment. Alexander notices it all and pretends he does not. In public, he introduces her simply as my wife, never elaborating, never volunteering her name unless pressed. Eleanor does not correct him. She answers politely when spoken to, listens more than she talks, and observes everything. At the first gala, she stands beside Alexander as donors praise the company's success. A woman in diamonds leans in and asks where Eleanor is from, her tone suggesting geography rather than interest. Eleanor answers honestly, naming a town no one in the room recognizes. The woman smiles thinly and turns away. Alexander registers the exchange and feels a faint irritation, not at the woman, but at the inconvenience of Eleanor not fitting neatly into his world. At the next event, a senior board member jokes loudly about Alexander finally settling, his eyes flicking toward Eleanor with amusement rather than respect. Alexander laughs along, reflexively, and Eleanor feels it land like a quiet bruise. She says nothing. She never does. Over time, a pattern forms. Eleanor becomes almost invisible to those who do not matter, yet oddly memorable to those who pay attention. She remembers names without effort. She asks thoughtful questions that are not intrusive. She thanks staff members directly, looking them in the eye, something Alexander rarely notices himself doing. At a private dinner hosted by a major investor, the conversation stalls when a delicate topic arises involving a stalled community project. Alexander prepares to redirect, but Eleanor speaks first, gently, offering a perspective that reframes the issue without assigning blame. The table grows quiet. The investor nods slowly, impressed. Alexander watches, surprised, as the tension dissolves. Later, in the car, he says nothing, but he remembers. At another event, Eleanor notices a subtle inconsistency in a speech draft Alexander is scheduled to give, a statistic that does not align with the program's actual funding. She mentions it quietly before he steps on stage. He corrects it just in time, earning applause he would not have otherwise received. He does not thank her, but the moment lingers. Still, the distance between them remains carefully maintained. Separate bedrooms, separate schedules, polite exchanges over coffee that grow colder when business calls intrude. Alexander continues to believe he is in control, that Eleanor's presence is neutral at best, tolerable at worst. Yet cracks begin to form in that certainty. He notices how people respond differently when she is nearby, how staff members relax, how conversations soften, how she never seeks credit. One evening, after a particularly long fundraiser, Alexander overhears a donor remark to his spouse that Eleanor has a calming presence, that she seems genuine. The word unsettles him. Genuine is not a currency he trades in. At home, Eleanor spends her evenings quietly, reading or writing at the dining table, never intruding on Alexander's space. Once, he passes through the room and sees her reviewing financial documents related to one of the foundations they support. "You do not need to concern yourself with that," he says, sharper than intended. She looks up, unoffended. "I was curious where the money actually goes," she replies. That answer lingers with him long after he retreats to his office. As the weeks pass, Alexander realizes something has shifted, though he cannot name it. Eleanor has not transformed. She has not become more glamorous, louder, or easier to explain. She remains exactly who she was on the day they married. The difference is that the room seems to adjust around her. And for the first time since signing the contract, Alexander feels a quiet, unfamiliar discomfort. The arrangement is working too well. People are beginning to see her, and he is beginning to realize that perhaps he never did. The charity gala that night is larger than the others, louder, brighter, and unmistakably political, held in a historic downtown venue where reputations are weighed as carefully as donations. This is not a room that forgives missteps. Alexander knows it, which is why he arrives fully armored in confidence, already preparing to manage optics. Eleanor walks beside him, calm as ever, her presence steady, her expression neutral. From the moment they enter, eyes follow them. Whispers ripple outward. Tonight, Eleanor is no longer merely unnoticed. She is scrutinized. Midway through the evening, as guests gather near the stage for the keynote announcement, the moment arrives without warning. A prominent social figure, emboldened by champagne and attention, steps forward during an open exchange and smiles too widely. "Alexander," she says, "we were all so surprised by your marriage." Then her gaze slides to Eleanor, slow and deliberate. "I suppose love truly is blind." A hush falls over the group, sharp and sudden. This is not a joke. It is a test. Alexander feels the room tense, waiting for his response, for the subtle cue that will decide whether this insult is acceptable. He laughs lightly, reflexively, the sound rehearsed, non-committal, an attempt to move on. Eleanor feels it immediately, not as a betrayal, but as confirmation. She could remain silent. She is allowed to. The contract demands nothing more. But something in the air shifts, and Eleanor steps forward before Alexander can redirect. She smiles, not politely, but calmly, and addresses the woman directly. I agree, Eleanor says, her voice clear, unshaken. Love is blind to appearances. Then she pauses, just long enough for the room to lean in. But it is remarkably attentive to character. The silence deepens. Eleanor continues, unhurried. This event supports initiatives that measure impact, not aesthetics. I imagine we all value substance over surface, especially in a room full of leaders. Several heads turn. The woman stiffens, caught between offense and the impossibility of retaliation. Applause begins softly, scattered, then grows. The host quickly moves the program forward, grateful for the shift. Alexander stands frozen for a beat too long, his mind recalibrating. He did not rescue Eleanor. She did not need it. As the evening continues, the tone changes. Conversations adjust. Guests who previously dismissed Eleanor now seek her out, curious, respectful. A foundation director thanks her quietly for saying what others would not. A donor remarks on her composure. Alexander watches it all from a distance, unsettled by the realization that control has slipped from his hands in a way he does not resent. Later, backstage, as the event winds down, Alexander finally speaks. You did not have to do that, he says, his tone measured but no longer cold. Eleanor meets his gaze. Neither did you, she replies. The words land heavier than accusation. On the drive home, the city passing in streaks of light, Alexander is silent. He replays the moment again and again, not the insult, but the response. Not the room, but his own reaction. For the first time, he recognizes the shape of his mistake. He assumed Eleanor would endure quietly. He assumed she would need him to shield her. He assumed wrong. As they reach the penthouse, Eleanor removes her shoes and sets them neatly by the door, an ordinary gesture that feels oddly grounding. Alexander watches her and realizes that tonight changed something fundamental. The world did not laugh at her. It listened. And he, for the first time, feels something dangerously close to shame. The contract still binds them. The arrangement still stands. But the balance has shifted. Eleanor passed a test she was never meant to face. And Alexander Reed failed one he did not know he was taking. That night does not end with raised voices or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it settles into a quiet tension that follows them into the penthouse like an unspoken third presence. The city outside glows softly, indifferent, while inside Alexander pours himself a glass of water he does not drink, and Eleanor moves through the living space with the same calm precision she always has. For the first time since the wedding, the silence between them feels charged rather than empty. Alexander breaks it, his voice lower than usual. What you said tonight, he begins, then stops, recalibrating. You handled that situation well. The words sound formal, insufficient. Eleanor turns to face him fully. Thank you. She replies, neither warm nor distant. They stand a few feet apart, an invisible line still drawn by habit. Alexander exhales. I should not have laughed, he says. It is not an apology, not yet, but it is closer than he has come before. Eleanor studies him, her expression unreadable. No, she agrees quietly. You should not have. The honesty lands cleanly, without accusation. Alexander feels it more sharply than anger. He gestures vaguely toward the room. This arrangement was supposed to be simple. Appearances. Efficiency. No complications. Eleanor nods. That is what we agreed to. And yet, he continues, his tone tightening. You complicate things by being more than expected. Eleanor does not smile. She does not soften the truth. I am exactly what I have always been, she says. The expectations were yours. The words strike a nerve Alexander did not know was exposed. He looks away briefly, then back. Why did you agree to this? He asks, finally asking the question he avoided from the beginning. Eleanor considers him for a moment before answering. I needed the money, she says plainly. Not luxury, not status, stability. For my family. She pauses, then adds, I also needed control over how I am treated while earning it. Alexander processes this in silence. He has heard need framed as desperation his entire life. What unsettles him now is that Eleanor does not sound desperate at all. She sounds resolved. You could have negotiated more, he says. Asked for protections. Public support. Eleanor meets his gaze. I did, she says. Tonight. The realization settles slowly. The contract. The clause about public respect. This was not compliance. It was foresight. Alexander feels something shift again, deeper this time. I am not good at this, he admits abruptly. At people. At being considerate. The word feels foreign on his tongue. Eleanor does not rush to reassure him. That is not my responsibility, she says gently. Another silence stretches, softer now. Alexander nods, accepting the boundary even as it unsettles him. I understand. He hesitates, then adds, I would like to do better. Not because the contract requires it. Because I failed tonight. Eleanor absorbs this, weighing intention against history. Finally, she speaks. Then start by listening, she says. And by not deciding who I am before I speak. Alexander nods again. I can do that. The conversation ends without resolution, without promises. Eleanor retires to her room, closing the door with quiet finality. Alexander remains in the living room, staring out at the city. He once believed he controlled completely. For the first time, he recognizes the cost of his assumptions. Not just to Eleanor, but to himself. He thought beauty was something to be curated, managed, displayed. He thought power was about distance. Tonight revealed a different truth, one he is not yet ready to name. In the quiet that follows, Alexander Reed realizes that this marriage has crossed an invisible threshold. It is no longer just a contract playing out on schedule. It is a mirror. And for the first time, he is forced to look at what stands in front of him. The reveal does not arrive with spectacle or music. It arrives quietly, the way truth often does, through a detail Alexander Reed was never meant to notice. It begins a week after the gala, during a routine board review for the charitable foundation tied to his company, a meeting he usually treats as formality. As executives discuss numbers and projections, a familiar name appears on the screen, not as a spouse, but as a consultant credited for restructuring outreach strategy over the past 2 years. Eleanor Shaw. Alexander stiffens. He interrupts the presentation, his voice controlled. Pause there, he says. Who is Eleanor Shaw in this context? The room hesitates. A senior director clears his throat. She is the independent architect behind the foundation's operational overhaul, he explains. She designed the funding model, the accountability framework, and the community vetting process. Without her, the program would have collapsed last year. Alexander feels a slow, precise shock. He keeps his expression neutral. When did this begin, he asks. 2 years ago, the director replies. Pro bono at first. She refused public credit. Said the work mattered more than her name. The meeting continues, but Alexander hears none of it. That evening, back at the penthouse, he waits. Eleanor arrives later than usual, carrying a folder, unaware of the storm forming behind his calm exterior. He does not accuse. He asks, How long have you been working with the foundation? He says, his tone even. Eleanor stops. She considers lying, then decides against it. Before we met, she answers. I was brought in after the original funding plan failed. You never mentioned it, he says. You never asked, she replies. The words are not sharp. They are factual. Alexander presses on. Why hide it? Eleanor sets the folder down. Because it was not relevant to the contract, she says. I did not agree to this marriage to impress you. I agreed to solve a problem. Several, actually. His voice tightens. You let me believe you were nothing more than someone in need. Eleanor meets his gaze without flinching. I was in need. That does not erase competence. Silence stretches between them. Alexander realizes, piece by piece, what this means. The woman he dismissed. The wife he underestimated. She was already moving within his world, shaping outcomes he claimed credit for, all while he saw only what confirmed his bias. You could have leveraged that, he says quietly. Used it to secure more. Influence. Power. Eleanor shakes her head. Power that depends on being seen is fragile, she says. I prefer work that survives without applause. The realization lands fully now. This is the reveal. Not a transformation, not hidden beauty uncovered, but the exposure of a truth he ignored because it did not fit his narrative. Eleanor was never beneath him. She was beside him, long before the contract, long before the ring. Alexander feels something fracture inside him, not his pride, but his certainty. I thought I was doing you a favor, he admits, the words tasting bitter. Eleanor nods once. I know. And yet you still agreed to the public respect clause, he continues. You still defended yourself without damaging the foundation. You protected the work. Eleanor's voice softens, but only slightly. Because it is not about you or me. It never was. It is about people who do not get second chances if systems fail them. Alexander exhales, the weight of his misjudgment pressing down on him. For the first time, he understands the depth of his error. He did not marry an ugly woman. He married a woman who chose integrity when no one was watching, who valued substance over recognition, who entered his world without asking permission or validation. That night, as Eleanor returns to her room, Alexander remains alone in the living space, staring at the city that once seemed simple. The contract still exists. The timeline still counts down. But the truth has surfaced, irreversible and undeniable. The marriage has shifted again, not because Eleanor changed, but because Alexander finally saw what was always there. And in that clarity, he feels the first true fear of loss, not of control, but of someone he never deserved to underestimate. The countdown becomes impossible to ignore once the truth is out, each passing day sharpening the awareness that the contract is nearing its end, and Alexander feels the pressure in places numbers never reached. Board members begin to speculate quietly about the stability of his personal life and what it means for the company, while media interest intensifies around the foundation's upcoming annual address, an event that will place Eleanor and Alexander on the same stage in front of donors, executives, and the press. It is the kind of moment Alexander once mastered, a controlled performance where optics decide outcomes. But this time the stakes are different. He knows now that silence would be a choice, and avoidance would be a verdict. On the morning of the address, Alexander asks Eleanor to meet him in the penthouse living room, the contract folder placed between them like an artifact from a different lifetime. He does not open it. I need to say something before tonight. He begins, his voice steady but unguarded. Eleanor listens without interruption. I entered this marriage believing control was enough, he continues. I believed respect could be managed and that dignity was negotiable. I was wrong. The words are not rehearsed. They land plainly. Eleanor studies him, searching for performance, finding none. Alexander exhales. I cannot undo what I assumed about you, but I can choose what I do next. He slides the contract toward her, untouched. I am prepared to end this publicly tonight, he says. To take the consequences. The board. The will. The company. If that is the cost of being honest, I will pay it. Eleanor's expression tightens slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. And if I do not want that, she asks. Alexander meets her gaze. Then I will respect that as well. I will not decide for you again. The choice is yours. The simplicity of the statement is its power. That evening, the venue fills quickly, anticipation thick in the air as donors and journalists gather for what they expect to be a routine address. Eleanor stands backstage, composed, while Alexander watches the crowd, aware that a single sentence will redraw his future. When they step onto the stage together, the room quiets. Alexander begins with prepared remarks, acknowledging the foundation's impact, then stops. He looks at Eleanor, then back to the audience. There is something I need to correct, he says. Murmurs ripple outward. I have benefited from work I did not publicly credit. From leadership I did not acknowledge. From a partner I underestimated. He turns toward Eleanor. Eleanor Shaw has been instrumental in shaping this foundation long before she became my wife. Tonight, I am choosing transparency over convenience. The board shifts uncomfortably. Cameras lift. Alexander continues, his voice unwavering. This marriage began as a contract. It will not continue as one. He steps back, making space. Eleanor understands the moment for what it is. Not a rescue. Not a plea. An offering of agency. She steps forward, her voice calm and clear. I agreed to this arrangement to protect what mattered to me, she says. I stayed because I was treated with dignity when I demanded it. I will not remain where respect is conditional. She pauses, then adds, I will choose partnership only if it is honest. The silence is complete. Alexander nods. Then let it be honest, he says. No contracts. No leverage. Just truth. Applause begins slowly, uncertain, then grows as the audience recognizes what they are witnessing, not a scandal, but accountability. Later, away from the lights, Eleanor and Alexander stand together without the folder between them. Whatever happens next, Eleanor says, it will be because we chose it. Alexander agrees. And for the first time, the future does not feel like a transaction. It feels like a responsibility he is finally ready to carry. The days that follow unfold without spectacle, without headlines screaming scandal or victory, but with a quieter kind of consequence that reshapes everything. The board does not collapse, though it shifts, recalibrating around transparency Alexander never believed possible. The foundation moves forward with renewed trust, no longer propped up by silence, but strengthened by truth. Eleanor resumes her work openly now, no longer unnamed, no longer hidden, yet unchanged in her approach. She still arrives early, still leaves quietly, still focuses on outcomes rather than recognition. Alexander watches her from a distance at first, learning restraint where he once imposed control. There is no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden declarations of love. Instead, there are conversations. Long ones, honest ones, sometimes uncomfortable ones. They sit across from each other at the dining table where the contract once lay, now empty, and speak without hierarchy. Eleanor sets her terms clearly. I will not be diminished to make you comfortable, she says. I will not be used as proof of your growth. Alexander listens, truly listens, and responds without defense. I will not ask you to stay, he says. I will only ask if you want to. Time passes. The 90 days expire quietly, marked not by a departure, but by a decision. Eleanor chooses to remain, not because she is bound, not because she is persuaded, but because respect has replaced assumption. They redefine the relationship deliberately, removing roles and expectations one by one. No press statements, no curated appearances, just two adults learning how to stand beside each other without erasing themselves. Months later, a small ceremony takes place, far from chandeliers and contracts, attended by people who mattered long before wealth did. There is no grand reveal, no transformation meant to impress. Eleanor wears what she chooses. Alexander does not lead. He walks beside her. When they exchange vows, they are not promises of forever built on fantasy, but commitments grounded in accountability, honesty, and choice. I choose you, Eleanor says, not because you changed for me, but because you learned to see. Alexander answers without hesitation. I choose you because you never needed me to define your worth. The moment passes without applause, without spectacle, but with a weight that feels earned. Later, as life settles into something steady and real, Alexander reflects on the man he was at the altar months ago, measuring value by appearance and silence. He understands now how easy it is to miss greatness when it does not announce itself. Eleanor never needed to become beautiful. She always was, in the way that matters, through integrity, restraint, and the refusal to be less than herself. The world did not change her. She changed the way the world looked at her, simply by standing still. And Alexander learned the lesson wealth could never teach him. Love is not something you acquire, manage, or negotiate. It is something you earn through humility and protect through action. The story ends not with a fairy tale, but with a truth worth remembering. He did not marry an ugly woman. He married someone who refused to be defined by his blindness, and in doing so, taught him how to finally see.